This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to this week's episode, where I'm speaking with two guests from the charity SongBird Survival, CEO Sue Morgan and Research and Engagement Manager Charlotte Bartley-Cross. We talk about the challenges being faced by songbirds and what you can do to encourage more into your garden and to help their chances of survival.
In the UK, there are more than 100 species of songbirds. I mean, so we're quite niche in that we specialise in those songbirds that are often the small birds that people really love and connect to. So they're a really good way for people to connect to nature and wildlife. But what's been happening, we were formed 25 years ago because at that point, songbirds had really started declining. For the last 50 years, they've been declining steeply. We've lost more than half of our UK songbirds in those 50 years. And as a charity, we realised that there were gaps in the evidence around what was causing the songbirds to decline. So we were founded. And since then, what we've been doing is looking at the reasons why songbirds are struggling so much, and we fund scientific research. The people connect to the ones you see in your garden really easily, sort of the blackbirds, blue tits, robins, but there are over 80 species of songbirds that are in the UK and breed every year. So what we're trying to do is untangle that mystery and problem that has existed around why they are in decline, and we're running campaigns to help people understand the reasons why and what action they can take, and all in all trying to reverse that decline and have a future where songbirds are thriving.
So, as you mentioned, there's some species of songbirds that I'm sure most people will recognise. In terms of classifying a songbird, is it literally a bird that's able to sing?
Yeah, so actually being a songbird is a little bit more difficult than that. So songbirds are members of the order Passeriformes, or passerine species, and over half of the world's birds are in this clade. So almost, over half the world's birds are songbirds. And how you classify a songbird is essentially they have a different kind of feet than most other birds. They have 3 toes facing forward, 1 toe facing backwards, and they're also known as the perching birds because this formation in their feet gives them great grasp on small branches, twigs, thin objects, which is often why you see them perching and singing in your gardens. So that's how we would classify a songbird here.
So, with that in mind then, are they at more risk of decline than other types of birds?
So they are under the threat similar to a lot of other bird species at the moment. Obviously, we're in kind of a 6th mass extinction due to humans. We've got lots of different pressures like climate change, land use change, habitat loss, and a whole range of issues. The reason that we focus on songbirds specifically is because they've got such a specific role to play. I mean, they disperse seeds in the environment. They're great players in this game of predator and prey, controlling insect populations, and like I said, dispersing seeds so that we've got trees and things growing further away. So yeah, they are different in the sense that all songbirds have similarities with each other, so that they're more likely to be under threat. And obviously, because many of them rely on insects as part of their life cycle, and we've got dwindling numbers of insects. I know that there's been a massive decline, over 60% in winged insects. That has then a knock-on effect on our songbird populations here in the UK and worldwide.
So when you said there's a 50% decline, is that across all species in general, or are some at more risk than others?
Well, yes, it is across. It's all species in general as a total, but it's really complex. So it's not that all of the sort of the species are all declining, and that's what makes it a real challenge for us as a charity, because it's not one size fits all in terms of the threats and what's happening. But we do know that of those 83 species that we're really concentrating on, more than half are kind of threatened or in decline. So, and even the birds are classified through with a system of sort of red, amber and green, which really helps us just as a top line to understand what's happening to them. But even within the birds that are classed as green and of least conservation concern, there are still declines happening. So it's a good indicator overall. But you'll find, if you just sort of think of a few sort of species that, we know and love and hope to always see in our gardens, things like the house sparrow, they're the third most common bird in the UK in terms of numbers. So you've got sort of population estimates in the well into above 5 million. But their sort of trend over the last 50 years is nearly 70% decline. So, you might think, well, I hear sparrows sort of regularly. I'm really lucky around by me. But those numbers, 50 years ago, there'd have been so many millions more. But then you'll have the robin, which is a real iconic sort of songbird species. We have National Robin Day every 21st of December. That's really sort of, where we're celebrating songbirds. Robins are actually sort of doing reasonably well and are green. So it's not easy. So that big figure is really shocking. But there are real variances and nuances within it. So we're trying to find different solutions for different species, as well as looking for trends across the different types of birds where there can be common solutions. And that's what we're really trying to look for as well, is where people can do something to take action and make a difference. Because I think it can be a bit overwhelming when you're hit with those big figures. But what we're trying to do is boil things down, make people recognise there is an issue, because it's hard to recognise there's an issue when you're still hearing that beautiful bird song. But if we can get people to recognise there is this big issue, but then want to do something about it, then we can start that road to recovery and make change happen.
As you said, it does sound very complex. I'm guessing there just isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. I guess it's a kind of multi-pronged attack where you need to think about habitat, food sources, threats from environmental pressures, all sorts of things. So with that in mind, are there any of our more common species that people just might not assume that are under pressure, but actually really are, and that they need help?
One I think that people might be quite surprised about, particularly when we think of a garden bird, is the greenfinch, which is red listed, and its numbers have gone down by well over 60% in the last 50 years. The greenfinch is a bird that actually we've managed to, it's been narrowed down to what really has been a key cause of that decline. And I think people might be surprised that is due to disease. And that disease has been shown to be transferred partially at feeders in gardens. So it's an unintended consequence of feeding birds, because it's trichomoniasis and it is passed through saliva at feeders. So where we're unintentionally harming birds by doing what we think is a good thing. So, that's just so that in itself is something that we could make a change for that particular bird that might be a bit more simple than for some other species. I don't know, have you got any more on that side of things, Charlotte? Because I know you know about this area.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different birds that you might be surprised about. For example, house martins. A lot of people have them nesting in the eaves, over their doors and things like that. And in the last 25 years, they've declined by over 50%. And then again, with starlings, a lot of people say that they see large numbers of starlings, and they might be just some of the lucky ones, because in the last 25 years, again, they've declined by over 60%. So there's a lot of more common species that people often think are doing really well. In fact, they're doing a lot worse than they did just 20 years ago. And we're just trying to find the solutions and how we can support them within our own homes.
I mean, house martins is a great one, isn't it? Glad you mentioned that, Charlotte, because in some cases, people are really discouraging the house martins that have flown here all the way from Africa, that amazing journey. I had some arrive in our area only last week, but then they don't want them nesting under the eaves. It can get messy. They might think it's unsightly, but actually, if you think what that creature's doing to survive, to come here to breed, it feels a little bit like we should have a responsibility to sort of enable them to do that. And by not supporting them in enabling somewhere to nest and breed can contribute to it. So we'd really encourage everybody to do what they can in their sort of space to, give them the helping hand.
The other thing I was thinking as you were talking then is, on a garden kind of level, apart from the nest boxes, what else can we be doing to help songbirds?
We've got a list of sort of 5 areas, because we want people to really sort of think about it year round when they're thinking what they're going to do in their garden. And it really is about going beyond the bird feeders. So if we sort of take the 5 areas, I'll give you the sort of the list of them, and then maybe we can sort of look at different elements that you can do within them. The first area would be around providing shelter. And it is about the cosy small spaces, bushes, tightly packed bushes, and places where birds can sort of stop and hide. It's not just about nesting. providing food, providing somewhere to nest and nesting material, providing water, and a really important one for us, and it's part of a lot of our sort of work that we're doing in some scientific research we've done in recent years, is around being natural and really ditching the pesticides. And that's a really strong sort of priority for us that we want to get across to people about really reducing pesticide use or stopping altogether in gardens, because it's proven that it has a positive impact on your garden wildlife, and particularly birds, from the research we did, if you do ditch the pesticides.
Obviously, we can do a lot in our gardens, and hopefully more and more people are doing that. Thinking about what songbirds are feeding their young, so are they mainly rearing their young on insects?
Yes, so insects are the main thing that they use when they're rearing their young, which is why we really, really stress that people should be planting for wildlife, planting for insects, planting those lovely flowers that are great for pollinators, because you want to encourage the kind of insects into your garden, because we've experienced such detrimental losses to our insect populations. And obviously that's going to then have a knock-on effect on songbird populations as well. So yeah, I mean, for example, like poppies, scabious, cornflowers and things like that are great things that you can plant for insects to attract them into your garden, and they look lovely as well this time of year.
And gardens are estimated to be about 10% of the land area of the UK. So even if all of us made a really concerted effort to keep our gardens wildlife friendly, I'm guessing in terms of the bigger picture, is there enough being done, in your opinion, you know, when you think about farmland or brown space, green space management, you know, the management of our roadsides, that kind of thing? Are there things that we could be doing better on that front as well?
Definitely. I mean, gardens, we don't want to kind of say it's the answer to everything, but it's really important that people do it to make a difference, because if we can make a difference in that, you know, 10% of is quite a big space that people can make a difference in. But it also then starts developing a movement of people that are thinking about wildlife as the first choice. And I think there is an element of that, of getting people to, it just becomes custom and practice that that's what we put first when we're making choices. So as an organisation, we're focusing on some key areas, but absolutely we could do more, and we need to do more. We do have to, you know, there's massive issues and dilemmas between, you know, getting the balance of food security with agriculture. We need housing, so it's urbanization, but actually there are more and more ways of being able to balance the different elements and making the right choices. And for us, what we want to do is be able to influence people, give them the scientific evidence that if they do something, it will make a difference. So we would support that wider work, but we've got to just concentrate on the things for us where we can make change for birds.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, there's so many pressures on songbirds by the sounds of it that it really is difficult, I'm imagining, for them. But you mentioned cats and you mentioned bird feeders. Again, in a garden, are there things that are really quick, easy things to do that would avoid harming songbirds or, you know, putting them at risk in any way?
I think water is an area that we've not sort of talked much about yet, and just you can't underestimate the value of water, really, you know, above all things, and providing water all year round, because it's in the winter it can be, you know, icy and birds and wildlife can't get water. In the summer it can be a drought and they can't actually get moisture, you know, in any other way. So we would say that is an absolute must. That is such a lovely way of something that, I mean, we mustn't forget with all of this that songbirds bring huge joy, huge well-being, and a huge connection to nature for us all. So we can do these things, and I think water is one to have in mind that we perhaps don't always think about in terms of it being the benefit for the animals. So that would be one that I would say is an absolute must in every garden in some format, and that you manage that and top it up regularly. You know, have it when you go out in the garden, just check that it is there for them. Charlotte, any others you'd pick up on?
Yeah, there's a couple more. I think number one for me is, if you're providing food for birds or water for birds, make sure that you're cleaning your feeders. That is one of the biggest issues that you have, especially in summertime. There's a huge spike in disease during this time because it's warm. Making sure you're cleaning your feeders properly and thoroughly on a weekly basis at least is paramount for the bird's health. And then on top of that, you talked about cats. Obviously, actually on our website, we've got a whole load of information on cats, because we did a research project on cats and understanding cat behavior and how to reduce hunting in cats. So we've got loads of information on our website about that. But I mean, just a quick, easy tip is if you do have bird feeders in your garden, planting kind of spiky plants at the base of your feeders is a great way to deter cats from sitting underneath your feeders, waiting for those bird species, not letting your cat out around dusk and dawn where there tends to be a flurry of activity by birds is also another good tip. And generally trying to put your bird feeders as far away from any known nests that you have in your garden, because our research that we conducted found that nests that were near feeders were predated 5 times as much as ones that were further away. So if you know that there's an active nest in your garden, try and make sure that your feeders are as far away as possible from that nest to try and maximize the benefit of feeding rather than the detrimental consequences that can come along with it.
I mean, are we better off not feeding?
That's a complicated question. I think that in the summertime, we as an organisation are really pushing for people to use natural food sources by planting for wildlife in their garden. It's what's best for the environment. It's what's best for the birds. I think that if you are using feeders again, like I said, it's best to make sure that they're really, really clean and that you remove them if you think there's any kind of incidence of disease. But during the winter time and in areas where you're near farmland and you've got these farmland species which are really, really struggling, providing specifically for them can be very, very helpful. So I think it's just being mindful of what food you're filling your feeders with and what birds you have around you and kind of what impact that's having on the wider environment and whether you can switch to natural feeding. Because if that's an option for you, then we would always recommend that.
And how about netting in gardens? Have you done any research into that? You know, I'm trying to think again about hazards that we do as gardeners that can actually cause harm without us really thinking about it.
It's not something I know out in relation to birds. I do in relation to hedgehogs, because I do sort of help rescue hedgehogs sometimes, and that can be a real issue with hedgehogs getting tangled up. But in terms of birds, Charlotte, do you have anything on that?
I've not heard about netting for fruit and vegetables before in relation to how it can be harmful to birds. Obviously, if you're protecting your fruit and veg, they can't get to it. So I suppose in that way, it stops them from being able to eat the food that's grown in the garden. Generally, as long as it's not completely upright, they're not going to get stuck in the netting. But as I'm sure many people have seen, when people go mist netting for birds, so trying to go bird ringing, they do put up nets to catch birds. So I think if you're going to have that kind of netting and it's going to be relatively upright, you're going to have to be checking it very, very, very consistently. But I'm unsure, to be honest. I haven't seen any research on that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think probably as long as you keep it taut, you're better off. It's when it gets a bit, slack or there's holes in it. I think that's, when I've kind of found problems with it. Yeah, netting, it can be dangerous if you don't check it and it's not well maintained, I think. And also thinking about hedge cutting, that's another thing I think people do at possibly the incorrect time of the year, and it can have a detrimental effect. It's not intentional, I know, but sometimes I think that can disturb birds. Have you got any thoughts around that?
We sort of do have sort of guidance around that, and we've got guidance on all these type of things on our website. I think it's what's really good is people are becoming more aware of the sort of the guidelines on what you can do. But absolutely, we would sort of recommend that people, don't cut their hedges and be really aware of breeding season for birds. And, because people may say, oh, yeah, I've had a quick look, there isn't there. But really take, look once, look twice, really be careful, but don't cut during this breeding season. But even on the edges of a breeding season, be ultra cautious around it, because you don't know whether some birds will have started, nesting either late or early. So it is much better to leave it if you can.
And remind me again, what's the breeding season?
It runs from February until late August normally, but we would recommend leaving it until at least September, October time, because there are some kind of late stragglers at the end who tend to breed a little bit later or do second or third clutches. So we would recommend you leave it as late as possible, unless it's like infringing on a path or the roadway or something like that. Because it's also better to leave many hedges have lovely fruit and things like that, and berries that birds and insects and people can use during that time. So if we can kind of avoid cutting that until most of that has gone as well, that's probably best for the environment and Makes quite nice pies as well a lot of the time.
The other thing, thinking about it at this time of year, which we're starting to get, people asking questions about, is if they find a baby bird out of the nest in springtime, and people will see it in their garden and might be confused as to what to do, because of if there are baby birds that are fledged, but they will spend the first sort of few days really they may be kind of on the ground bobbing around. The parents are likely to be nearby, but often people think that they've been abandoned and they haven't. So we've got a really sort of helpful infographic on the website that people can look at, of a bit of a flow chart of when, if you do find a bird that you're worried it's been abandoned or it's come out of a nest, what you should do, because people do worry that they're going to do the wrong thing, and there are quite clear steps of what to do at each stage.
Yeah, well, that's useful. I mean, I think a lot of people do tend to find them where they're a bit exposed and worry because they're, even if the parents are visiting, that potentially it's at risk if it's on a pavement or where cats are in the neighbourhood. I suppose that's probably the biggest source of concern, is it?
It is. And yes, often. But so if you think a bird is really in danger, then that would be the point where you would be quite right to try and sort of shoo it into safety or have some form of intervention. But generally speaking, if you can keep it safe from predators, is let it do its thing, for nature. If it is a bird that's got feathers and it is moving around quite happily, the parents will be nearby keeping an eye on it. If it's a tiny little, nestling that has fallen out of the nest, that is going to need some help to survive. But it is a thing that, people do worry about and ask questions about. So hopefully that can help.
Yeah, absolutely. And so finally, I'm going to ask you each, if you could do one thing in your garden, and, everybody's got, I suppose, their favourite tips and hints, but if you could encourage people to do one thing that would really help songbirds, what would that be?
For me, which has been something that has been a bit of a revelation in the last few years, it's really stop using the pesticides, and, don't be afraid of things not being absolutely perfect, because messy is good, because that's what really works for the wildlife. If there are some natural foods and there are insects aplenty. So for me, that's a change that I have made, and I've become really kind of adamant about as to what happens in our garden. I'd really recommend that to everybody.
And for me, I think because I was a renter up until last year, where I finally became a homeowner, I think a lovely bit of advice is that you don't need very much space to make a really big impact. You don't need to have acres of land. You can just have a container with some plants, with some lovely climbers. You can make the most of the space you have, and it can be movable. So it can be in containers, it can be in planters, it can be in hanging baskets, and it'll still have that impact on the wildlife around you. They'll find your oasis in the middle of like an urban sprawl. So I think I would always recommend that everybody do what you can. You can even have tiny little container ponds made out of old reused plastic boxes and things like that. And that can be a whole world to amphibians. They'll find a way to get there. So I think, just for website in general, even if it's just a pile of leaves, or not cutting your grass, or like I said, planting climbers because you don't have any space horizontally, you can go vertically. So I think that for me would be the biggest kind of tip I would give to people. Don't be discouraged by the size of the garden that you may or may not have, even if it's just a balcony or just outside your front door. There's always space for wildlife.
And overall, if I can just sneak one other little one in, is just get outside and listen to the birds and watch the birds, and just sort of connect with them and how wonderful they are, and think about what they bring for us all and for wider, nature, wildlife and biodiversity, because that is just such a wonderful thing.
Thank you very much to Sue and Charlotte. Please do go and check out the work of SongBird Survival. Links are in the show notes as always. And thank you as well for listening. If you like this interview, I recommend checking out episode 199, Britain's Birds with Benedict MacDonald, released on the 18th of July 2022, and episode 68 about the Garden Bird Watch with Kate Risley of the BTO, released on the 15th of October 2019. You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.